Thank you, General. Buzz Brockaway has arrived, and he's one of the candidates for Secretary of State. So, Buzz, would you like to come up and say a few words?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. Appreciate the Chairman Padgett being a little flexible with me. Unfortunately, my wife's grandmother passed away, and the service was this morning in Blairsville. So I've been on the road a little while. But I thank you all for being here today. Thank all of you for participating in this important convention this weekend for the Republican Party. You know, 20 years ago, I first got involved in the Republican Party. I was a precinct captain in Gwinnett County, and in those days I didn't know any better, and so I just got the list of all the voters and just went around and started talking to them. Of course, half of them were Democrats and some were Republicans, and I didn't know any better. And I just knocked on every door and talked to them about the Republican Party. I worked my way up in the Republican Party in Gwinnett County there, and eventually from 2002 to 2005 became chairman. And those were exciting times back then. As you recall, we were trying to flip the state to the Republican column back then. 2002 election really stands out to me. We had Sonny Perdue and Saxby Chambliss on the ballot, and nobody gave those two guys a chance. All the polling said they were going to get creamed, that Roy Barnes was going to steamroll into re-election, and the Democrats were going to hold that Senate seat. But lo and behold, they won. And the state started to flip to the Republican column back then. And, you know, it was just a tremendous honor to be chairman of the Gwinnett County Republican Party back then, because so many folks came out and volunteered for us, and we had tremendous turnout and helped play a part in flipping the state over to the Republican column, and that was very exciting times. So here we are 15 years later, and the Democrats are looking at our state and saying, hey, we're going to flip that state back to the Democratic column. And I think we're going to have to be ready for what's going to happen next year. You're getting a little taste of it in the 6th District special election, but if they are going to come hard, I believe, against us next year, throw everything they have at us and try to flip this state back to the Democratic column. And I think now more than ever, it's important for us as Republicans to recommit ourselves to the conservative principles that we all stand for, to work hard to take our conservative message to every corner of this state, no matter what folks look like, where they came from, or where they are now. The message of conservatism works best for everybody. And I think it's important for us as Republicans to commit ourselves to that message and take that to every corner of our state. Now, you're going to be electing new leadership. You're going to be electing new chairmen and new officers for this party, and that's very, very important. And the decisions you make this weekend are going to have a big impact on what happens. And I just want to take a moment. I want to thank Chairman Padgett and so many of the folks that labor every day at our state Republican Party for working so hard. They're still working hard this weekend to put on this convention, and I want to thank them for their service and what they've done for our party over these last 4 years. So. Thank you. I'm married to my best friend, Krista. We've been married for 24 years. We have 3 daughters, 3 teenage daughters. So y'all pray for me. And I live in Lawrenceville, lived there since the mid-'70s, and we attend Victory World Church at Hamilton Mill, where my wife and I lead a marriage Bible study trying to help couples strengthen their marriages. I went to Georgia Tech. I hope nobody will hold that against me, but all right, we got a few yells over here. All right. Went to Georgia Tech and got out in 1990 with a degree in management science. Management science, we kind of study efficiency, and that's what I did. I worked at a plastics manufacturing company for about 30 years, 20 of those years as an operations manager. So I spent a lot of time studying efficiency and what that all means. In 2010, I was elected to the State House, and for the past 7 years, I've served the people of Gwinnett County in the Lawrenceville-Suwanee area in the State House. Currently, I am the chairman of the Code Revision Committee, and that committee's job is to look for obsolete and outdated laws and repeal them. So that's a fun committee to chair. Previously, I was the vice chairman of the Governmental Affairs Committee, and one of our jobs there on that committee, I think our chairman is out there, Chairman Ed Reinders. One of the jobs of that committee is to work with election law with the Secretary of State's office in elections. And so I believe that the experiences that I have in life and the skills that I have make me a great candidate for the office of Secretary of State. Now, the highest profile part of the Secretary of State's office is the Elections Division. That's the one that gets in the newspaper, and that's the one that has gotten our friend Brian Kemp sued so many times over the last few years as Democrats have come after him. And it's critically important, I believe, that we fight for free and fair elections, that we do everything we can to make sure that everybody has access to the polls. Now, unfortunately, there are people out there who don't agree with that, and I think you've gotten a taste of that in the 6th district race. As you've probably heard, there was a lawsuit that was filed, and a judge ruled to allow voter registration to be reopened again prior to the runoff. Now, in concept, I have no problem with that. However, what I do have a problem with, what I vehemently oppose, is attempting to change the rules in the middle of the game, and that's exactly what happened here. It's just not right. A much better approach would have been, the Democrats could have done this if they'd have wanted to, would be to introduce a bill in the legislature to say, let's reopen the ballot, the voter registration. Then we could have debated it. The public could have had input. We could have thought about it, worked out any kinks that might have been there, and we could have done it in an orderly fashion. But unfortunately, activists filed a lawsuit to try to find a judge that would rule the way they wanted to so that they could try to game the system in the middle of a hotly contested special election. And I think we have to oppose those sorts of things with everything we can. And if I'm Secretary of State, I'm going to fight against those sorts of things tooth and nail. Another decision that was made was by the DeKalb County Board of Elections. They decided to open up some new early voting places for the runoff. Early voting places that were not open during the special election. And once again, this was pushed by activists to try to help their candidate win. It's not about access, it's not about fairness, it's about winning. And I think that these sorts of things undermine the credibility of our elections, and we have to fight against them with everything we have. And if I'm Secretary of State, I'm going to oppose those sorts of things, no matter which political party does it, oppose attempts to twist the law and game the system in order to gain a partisan advantage. A recent YouGov poll had some pretty startling data. It said that 52% of Republicans and 38% of Democrats are convinced that there were millions of illegal votes cast in the 2016 election. 69% of Democrats believe that the Russians stole votes in order to help Donald Trump win. Now, with this lack of trust in our election system, it's critically important that we do everything we can to ensure that people have faith and trust that when they cast their vote, it's counted accurately and recorded properly. Now, we have a great opportunity, I think, to review all of our election processes. The voting machines that we currently use are getting old. They were purchased during Kathy Cox's term as Secretary of State in the early 2000s. Some of them, by the time the 2020 presidential election comes around, will be 20 years old. Many of them right now are about 13 years old. So it's getting harder and harder for local elections officials to get them ready for the election. Now, the next Secretary of State, I believe, is going to have to lead the charge to purchase new voting equipment. I want to see Georgia purchase new voting equipment that includes a paper backup so that we can have confidence that the machines are working properly and that voters will have confidence that their vote is cast and counted accurately. Now, this is not going to be cheap. This might cost us $100 million or more, but I think it's critically important that we ensure to the people of Georgia that these machines in our system is accurate and correct. Now, one other aspect of voting that's critically important is data privacy. You probably all remember a couple of years ago, there was an accidental release of some data of the voter list that included Social Security numbers. Now, thankfully, that data was all retrieved and nobody's identity was stolen. But it's a concern that we have to be aware of. Additionally, the FBI is currently investigating a potential data breach at the elections office at Kennesaw State University. We don't know if anything criminal happened. It appears that possibly a person gained access to something that they should not have. But accidents are going to happen. Cybersecurity and data hacks are a constant worry these days, and we have to do everything we can to be vigilant. But I believe there's another way to approach this. As I was researching it, I'm not aware of any federal or state law that requires us to keep Social Security numbers attached to voter registration. The federal government only requires that we keep the last 4 digits of your Social Security number. So if I'm Secretary of State, what I would do is I would purge that list of full Social Security numbers. This will make it less attractive to hackers to want to steal, and if, God forbid, an accident happened, the risk of ID theft is very small. So I think there's new ways that we can approach things. Now, one thing I would say as a Republican, we have to make sure that the public knows that we want every citizen to vote. And I believe that that should be something that we as Republicans all agree on. Now, it used to be that African Americans in this state, in the South, voted Republican because the Democratic Party would not register them to vote. They were trying to block them. And so they looked, and the Republicans were willing, and they registered them, and they voted. So how we conduct elections and the message that we send to the citizens of Georgia is critically important. It reflects on us as a party. If we want to welcome everybody to this party, and I believe we do, and I believe we're going to have to, if we're going to continue to win in Georgia, we're going to have to expand who it is that's part of the Republican Party. Every person that believes in conservative values should be attracted to the Republican Party. So I think it's important for us to send that message. And if I'm Secretary of State, I'm going to send the message to every person in Georgia that we want them to vote. And we're going to have a secure system that makes it easy for them to vote for every citizen of this country who lives in Georgia to be able to vote. And I think that's an important message that we as a party need to send. And if I'm Secretary of State, that's the message I'm going to send. Another aspect of the Secretary of State's office is professional licensing. The Secretary of State is responsible for overseeing most of the professional licensing boards that operate in this state. Most of those licenses exist to protect the public from harm or from fraud. But unfortunately, we've seen a trend toward using those licenses to freeze out competition rather than simply to protect the public. Now, fortunately, in state government, we already have an entity in place to deal with that. It's called the Georgia Occupational Regulatory Review Council. Now, the Regulatory Review Council has 2 jobs. One of them, they provide advice when a new license is proposed, whether this is a profession that should be licensed or not. The second thing they do is perform periodic reviews of each existing license to see whether that license is needed and whether they're providing the value that we as a public want them to. And I've found that they have not been performing the periodic audits of existing licenses. So I introduced House Resolution 744 to bring attention to this and to call on the Regulatory Review Council to perform what the law requires them to perform these periodic reviews. And I hope that in the next legislative session we can get this passed and shine a light on this and encourage them to do their job. The Secretary of State is a member of that Regulatory Review Council, and I can promise you, if I'm the Secretary of State of Georgia, the Georgia Occupational Regulatory Review Council will perform these periodic reviews. And if we find that there are licensing boards that are throwing up barriers to entry rather than just doing their job of protecting the public from harm and fraud, then we're going to do something about it. Now, why is this important? It's a very simple thing. It's for jobs. We want people in this country, in our state, to be able to pursue whatever profession they want to pursue. Whatever their version of the American dream is, that's what we want them to be able to pursue. And if we throw up barriers unnecessarily that hurt them and cause them to not be able to follow their dream, then we're harming people, we're harming families. We make it hard for people to provide for their family. And we can't say that we're the best state in America to do business with if it's hard for people to get into the profession that they want to get into, if it's hard for people to obtain a license for whatever profession they want to obtain. Now, I'll say one last thing before I go. My favorite movie, one of my favorite movies, is the movie Braveheart. You probably all remember that movie from a few years back, where Mel Gibson stars as William Wallace, the freedom fighter in Scotland. One great scene, William Wallace looks at the Scottish nobles and he says, "You think that the people exist to provide you with position, but I believe that your position exists to provide those people with freedom." And unfortunately, with such cynicism in politics, people look at government with such cynicism now. And I believe one large reason for that is the general public has looked at many, many politicians and concluded that they think that the public is supposed to provide them with a position. And that's not in our Constitution. That's not what our founding fathers intended. If we want our government to function the way the founding fathers intended at every level of government, then we need to elect people who believe that the position that they hold exists to provide people with freedom. And I believe that the office of Secretary of State exists to provide people access to their political system through fair and free and accurate elections. And I believe that the Secretary of State's office exists to provide people access to pursuing their version of the American dream through obtaining a professional license and starting a business and being entrepreneurial, all the things that we want people to do. And I can promise you, if I'm Secretary of State, I'll wake up every morning and I'll remember that my job as Secretary of State is to fight for the freedom of the people of Georgia, of all the people of Georgia. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for your time. God bless you, and God bless the state of Georgia.